All right. Hello, everyone. Today we have Hassan, our Mindtek graduate. We will be conducting the mock interview with the Hassan and discussing the most asked interview questions for a SDET position. Hassan, thank you for coming,
Thank you
taking
for
the
having me.
taking this mock interview, being brave. I know that it's not easy to take the mock interview. Let's get started. Can you briefly tell about yourself?
Within this course, I've been able to learn a full stack software development engineer and test position, and that includes front-end testing and back-end testing. Within back-end testing, I utilize, front-end testing, I test the UI, and for that, I use Selenium WebDriver. That's going to be the main tool that's going to help us test throughout the platform on a user interface on web applications. And so within Selenium WebDriver, there's two frameworks I'm familiar with when writing automation code for front-end testing, and that's Cucumber and TestNG. When it comes to back-end testing for automation, I know how to utilize rest assured libraries for API testing. And when it's database testing in the back-end as well, I utilize JDBC, Java Database Connectivity. And that helps with testing within the back end. So part of the application, there's a front end and the back end, and the front end makes sure everything's working for the user when they utilize the application. And then in the back end, we're making sure that the result is being saved within the database. We can't see it, but we're making sure that the information is being stored within the back end. So for front end and back end, those are some of the tools that I know how to use. When it comes to manual testing for front end, it's pretty easy, but I know how to write test cases and steps as well, giving the actual result compared to the expected result, and give feedback on it as well too. When it comes to back-end testing manually, I know how to utilize Postman. And then for back-end testing for databases, I utilize a PostgreSQL tool as well. So I'm familiar with SQL queries that can help me locate relational data within the database.
Okay, good. So you mentioned about the API testing. Can you tell me different HTTP methods in API?
So API calls, there's four significant ones. There's post, and that's when we're going to create, let's say it's a user, a new customer, and the new customer has to put in their first name, last name, email, and a password and a username per se. For that, we would create a post call, and we can include in that body all that information. So that way, when we create that post, it's going to create that user. And then we have a get call, which is when, let's say we do have a user created, there's going to be an ID of some sorts to locate it that the database provides after you create it. And if it's in that database, when we utilize that get call with the ID attached to the endpoint of the base URL, it's going to give us a response of the specific user, let's say, that we're calling it for. So if I'm calling user 223, it should be giving me a response with the user 223 and all of its details. And then we have put, and within put, that is going to basically, we're going to edit all the body information within a certain user that we are going to manipulate with. And then we have patch. And then patch is just maybe we're just going to manipulate one detail about the user that we are specifically going to manipulate with.
All right. So what status code you get when you make a post call?
When you make a post call, it should give us 201 created.
Great. So what is the difference between authentication and authorization in APIs?
So authentication, I believe, is a code 401. And that is when we enter an invalid token. And the tokens that we utilized is JSON web tokens. And so if we enter the wrong token, we are going to get a 401 authentication error, which means we provided the incorrect token. And then for 403, which is authorization error, is we provided a token that works, that's probably working for part of the application. However, the certain action that we are trying to perform is not authorized for that token user. So it may be that the token is right, but there's only limited actions that we can perform within that token, and then that we may need another token required for the proper behavior that we're trying to emit.
Okay, that sounds good. Can you tell me what's the difference between post and the put call?
Between post and put?
Yes.
So post, again, is when we create any information that we're providing within the body. And then put is that the information's already created, and all we're doing is we're manipulating the body, the data within that body.
And what if you're trying to update a data with the put call, but that data doesn't exist?
It should return us a 404 not found, which means that the ID that we have provided at the endpoint of the base is not identifying any user ID, let's say for this instance, that it matches that ID that we gave it. So it's not found in a database.
Put will behave like a post. If the data doesn't exist that we're trying to update, the put will behave as a post. It will create that data. It will not update, but it will create that data. But if we get it, let's say we're trying to get a data with data that doesn't exist, then we'll get the 404.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, great. Coming to the SQL, can you tell me what's the difference between inner join and right join?
Inner join is when we are going to identify two different data sets, and what we're going to do is make sure that we include both sets of data within the data table that it's going to create us. Depending on whatever columns we provide it's going to make sure that all the data within those columns are in there. For right join, whatever data table information we provide at the right side of a SQL query, it's going to basically take all of the data information when it's joined within the columns, but only process mostly all the information on the right data table. So when we make a new data table, the left, let's consider it the left data set, any information that is not on the matching, let's say matching column. So two different data sets should have at least one column that's the same. But if we have one data set on the right, the left data set on the left is not going to provide all the column details if it doesn't have any matching specific ID column that we're linking it with towards the right data set.
Okay. So the inner join will get us the matched data between the two tables, and the right join it will get us the matched data, at the same time non-matched data from the right table.
Oh.
So what is the primary key and the foreign key?
Primary key. So the primary key is when we're in a specific data table, the primary key is basically like the priority ID that is the main, joining column between tables. And then, so let's say one data table has a primary key, and then there's another data table, and it has a foreign key. The foreign key is actually identical to another data table's primary key. But within that data table that has that foreign key, it has another primary key specific for that data table.
So how would you get a data that starts with letter A? How would you write that?
So I would select and then star for all columns, just for this example. And we're going to select all columns from, let's just say, employees, where this is when we're going to label each column is equal to A. And we're going to make sure that we have that A within a quotation, so that way it recognizes the string and that it's searching for that A.
So in that case, it will get us the names that's just have a name as a A. But let's say you want to get the names that starts with the letter A.
We
will use a like, and we'll say single quotes A, and we'll put the percentage sign saying whatever we have name, whatever we have the name that starts with the A, and we don't know whatever the rest of it, like percentage.
So when the data is like, and then quote A, and then the percentage sign, yes. And the percentage sign signifies that this is the end point. So we want to start with the first letter should be A.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes. All right. Let's come to the Selenium WebDriver. Can you tell me the advantages of the Selenium?
So Selenium is open source. It's cross-compatible amongst many browsers. And being that it's open source and free, it has a community that's updating and helping. And if there's any forums or blogs that anyone needs help with, there's a lot of information provided there as well. It's pretty easy to set up within the framework. And I do believe it's also compatible amongst many different computer types as well too.
Operating systems. And it works with the different programming languages.
Yes, different programming languages as well too.
Great. How do you handle the iframes in Selenium?
If we have a frame within a UI and we have to access an element within that frame, we have to make sure that we step into that frame. So within that tool, we're creating an object of iframes. And what we're doing is we're making sure that we locate that element of that frame, either by XPath or some other CSS locator. And we identify it, and then we step into that frame. And so anything now that we do within that frame, we can now access any web elements that are within that frame. But now let's say that we need to step out of that frame. We also need to make sure that we include code that enables us to have a behavior where the user is exiting outside that frame. Not specifically the user, but the automation is stepping outside that frame. So that way, if anything that needs to be used within the actions of the automation outside of that frame, it can go ahead and step out and then be able to locate the web elements outside of it. Anything within a frame, we need to make sure we step using the iframes method. And anytime we need to step out of it, we make sure that we also utilize that iframes method, and we write code to step out of it as well too, to exit it.
So what methods we use to get into the frame and step out from the frame?
It's on the tip of my tongue. I can't quite remember the specific name of the method.
No worries. So we use switch to
that
frame, and we provide the frame ID in order to get into the frame. Once we perform all the actions, then we say switch to parent frame.
Okay.
And we'll step out from that frame.
And will we begin that with the driver?
Yeah, driver switch to. Yeah.
Okay.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What's the difference between implicitly wait and explicitly wait in Selenium?
Implicitly wait is going to generally apply for all web elements within a page that we're loading. And so when we use a implicitly wait, we are making sure that all web elements are loaded, and then we're going to give it a specific time, let's say about 20 seconds, 10 seconds, and it's going to give us about 10 seconds until all web elements are loaded properly. And if it's past 10 seconds and they're not loaded properly, I imagine it would give us some sort of error message. When we use explicit wait, we are waiting for a certain condition. So let's say for a text, right? We want a specific text to appear. Until then, we can make sure we go on to the next point. So for that, explicit wait is basically providing a specific condition to happen and to occur. So that way, before we go on to the next step within our code, it makes sure that we meet that condition first.
What conditions we apply the explicitly wait?
Sometimes we can have wait till text is visible. That's a specific one. Another one,
Element to be visible, right?
Element to be visible. Yes.
And other one is element to be clickable.
Clickable.
Yeah, there's multiple options, but there's these are the main ones. And sometimes we'd say element to be selectable.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's good. In Java, can you tell me what's the difference between string and string builder?
String is immutable. So when we create a new string, it cannot be changed. It's stored in a Java pool memory, a string pool memory, where that specific string object cannot be mutated. If we create a new one, then what's going to happen is that it's just going to create a new object in memory. And then string builder is actually mutable. So it's going to use that same object in memory, but if we change the value, it can either use the same object or it will look for something within the string pool that has an identical value and utilize that memory and address, or address and memory. So string is immutable and string builder is mutable. We can manipulate it.
In Java, what is the final keyword?
In final keyword for Java, when we attach this final keyword before its member, what happens is that no one can manipulate that keyword, and it can't be
You mean the variable, right?
yes, it cannot be, the variable cannot be manipulated at all, and it cannot be reinitialized, I believe, too.
That's correct. Okay, that's for variable. What about the final method?
For final method, I believe it's the same ideology where the method cannot be overridden.
What's the difference between the list and set?
List and set. So set is going to have unique values within the set, and a list can have multiple values that are the same. And for list, it should be ordered in the way you put it in. For set, there's not going to be no particular order. But I think that's the two main differences. For list, you can have multiple values that are the same, and it's going to be in order. And then for set, it's going to be in random order, could be, and it can only have unique values.
Very good. For the map, what is the map? How it stores the data in?
Map. So when we utilize map, we're providing a key and a value. So when we give a key, the keys have to be unique. And then the value specifically, they do not have to be unique. And that is because the keys itself are the reference towards that value. And so we have to make sure that the keys are unique because we don't want it to be confused on which key if it's not unique. And usually it would give us an error too if we try to use the same key that we already have within the map. And so it has unique keys and it can have the same values as well. And I do believe it's not in order as well too.
That's right. it will store them in a random order.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Can you tell me what's the difference between hash map and tree map?
Mm-hmm. So tree map, I believe, is when we have keys and values that are sorted in order. And then hash map, hash map will, I believe, eliminate the actual values that are...
Hash map will store in a random order. Tree map will store them in the sorted order by their keys.
Okay.
And one more difference, hash map can take null as a key. Tree map doesn't take null as a key.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's very good. There's two types of exceptions. What are those?
We have checked and unchecked exceptions.
Okay.
Checked exceptions usually are given to us by the specific IDE that's giving us, hey, it's giving us hints, and it'll usually provide us some sort of message before we even run the code. Unchecked exceptions is when we get a response error or bug within the console, and it's going to actually tell us the type of error that we have after we run the code.
All right, let's come to the framework. So what is the data provider in TestNG framework?
Data provider in TestNG framework allows us, it's an annotation, and we give it a name, and we can give multiple sets of data within brackets. And so when we include, let's say, a first line of bracket, let's say I have name, password, and date of birth. And so I can have 3 separate strings within those 2 brackets between it. And I can include those 3 values, and I have to make sure on my part that however I input information on the application, I need to make sure that I have them in order as well within that bracket. And so if I want to include multiple sets of data, I can have the same tests ran multiple times utilizing different data. So the first line of data will be ran, and then again, I have to make sure I provide the correct data format in the next bracket. And this could be different data as well too. It's very helpful when we're reviewing multiple positive cases that have lots of edges maybe in it, and we need to make sure that we're getting the specific business requirements to meet. And it's very helpful because you don't have to run multiple different tests or provide different tests with different data. You can just use one test and then utilize your data provider name as well, and then you would include it within that test column as parameters. And it will utilize that data that it's taking, that you have provided it, and it's going to run multiple tests with the different data sets.
Where would you store your data? So let's say you're building a framework and you have a bunch of data that you are testing your functionalities with, right? And where are you going to store this data?
I usually will create a configurations folder. And then within that folder, I have a configurations.properties file. And that file is going to basically have my stored key and values. And the keys can be specific names I give that can be read within my tests that I'll call. And then using a config reader, it will read that key I provide, and it will locate the configurations.properties value of that key, and it will utilize that value within the data of the test I'm running it in.
That's for a configuration data, right? So when you're trying to pass your URL, username, password, right? And that's where you want to store them. That's a properties file. But let's say test data, a data that you are testing the functionality with. First name, last name, right?
Usually I will provide it on a separate Excel sheet then.
Good. So We can use Excel spreadsheet or CSV files, which is comma separated values, right? And read the data from there. Great. Where do you run your test cases from your automation suite?
If it's testng specifically, I have a testng.xml file. And in this file, I set it up within my suite, and I'll provide a specific class name and specific tags that's going to be also attached within the tests too. And so whatever tags and class name I provide, if I give it a specific class, it will go into that class. And if I give it specific tags, it will run only the tests with those specific tags. If it's in Cucumber, usually I can run it from my runner class. And within the runner class, it's going to glue my steps with my features file all together. And then just from that runner class, I can simply click play and it will run all the tests. And again, also it has a tags annotation provider. And so whatever tags I provide it with, it will also consider that and make sure that it's running those specific tags of the features.
Good. But where, let's say you want to run your regression, where would you run the regression?
Usually I would have it connected to my Jenkins. And in this pipeline, I'll have it set up specifically for a regression suite. I believe is in between every 2 to 3 sprints. So around every 2 months, I'll run a regression suite that is connected to, again, my Jenkins. And within a testng framework, the Jenkins would be set up through the testng.xml file. And it wouldn't be me specifically running it. I could provide it a specific time to run those tests. And Jenkins itself will recognize the IDE and the code. And so it will run without me even having to be there.
Good. Where the Jenkins will get the repository from?
So the repository will be provided from the Git repository. And so when we have this URL created in the GitHub, after we upload it into GitHub, basically then we provide that repository URL and we would then attach it to our Jenkins. And so what it's going to do is it's going to access that code output from the Git repository and then go ahead and run it and let us know if there's any errors, how many tests passed, failed, and it will usually give us a report of what all happened within that automation.
What kind of reports do you use?
Cucumber reports and testng. If you have the plugin and dependency of Apache Surefire, it can provide us a beautiful web-based report of our tests.
There's also a Lure report. Just do a research. That's one of the good reports that you can use for your automation. That's good. Coming to your daily activities, can you tell me what do you do on your daily basis at your work?
In the middle of the sprint, the first thing I'll usually do is check my emails. I want to make sure that my smoke tests are running smoothly. If any regression tests are going on, I'll also check that as well too. But primarily the smoke tests every night, and I want to check my reports if there's any bugs to see if there's any issues that I can solve or resolve right before our daily stand-up. But usually if it's all good and it's smooth, then I move on to my daily stand-up, which is around 9 a.m. It's a 15-minute discussion amongst our team of what we completed yesterday, what our goal to complete is for today, and any blockers that we may have that's preventing us to complete the goals that we have that day. And then usually after that daily stand-up, I'll go ahead and, again, if it's in the middle of the sprint, I'll go ahead and get to my automation for my test scripts. If we're in the beginning of the sprint, then usually I am going over the business required documents and I'm analyzing how I'm going to go about scripting my tests. And so And then if it's just at the end, I'm usually just finishing up any code, making sure that I'm following up on demo meetings as well too. Towards the end of the day, anything that maybe I have uploaded to GitHub, I'll recheck, I'll revisit, and I'll make sure that it's correct before I deposit it and before I end the day.
Push your code, right? To
Yes.
GitHub. Great. Do you prefer working individually or with the teammates?
Preferably, I'd like to work with teammates, and it's really good to work with teammates as well too, especially if you're stuck on something. Someone may have just that little tip that might have you break through onto your next objective. It's also really good so that way you develop team chemistry together as well too. And usually when we're having code reviews, we're working as a team and we're peer reviewing our code all together. And so I really enjoy working with teams. Kind of gets me out of my head of my computer all day too. And again, part of the team is very important for the software team as well too. So having integrity and common ground with your teammates is really well to have.
Any questions for me?
What do you prefer when you automate tests? Do you prefer TestNG or Cucumber?
So I'm not going to answer it. We are done with the interview. Great job. So It's important to ask questions at the end. That's why I asked you. Yeah. So it is, at least we should ask like one or two questions for sure. So that shows your interest, in this position. So it's good always to keep up with the questions at the end. All right. Thank you, Hassan. That was a great interview. I gave you the instant feedback. Okay. And you did a great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.